Dobro jutro, good morning. We are here for the first session of the conference Music in Society. The session is called Contemporary Views on Old Music. The first speaker is Daniela Castaldo, and as all biographies are printed in the abstract book, I'm not going to introduce speakers more than the name. Daniela's paper is Music Archaeology in the Po Valley, a Roman trumpet from Voghenze.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for being here and to the organizers for the invitation. And I will start this first session with a topic related to the classical antiquity. And in the ancient Greek and Roman civilizations, musical events had a special function during all the moments of the social life, both public, such as the religious ceremonies, the sporting competitions, the military activities, and private, such as a symposium, the weddings or funerals. For the musicologist dealing with antiquity, several types of sources are available in order to reconstruct and study musical behaviors and sound of these ancient civilizations. Different kind of written sources, focusing more or less directly with music, visual evidence represented in different media, and finally, musical sources, such as fragments of musical instruments and texts with musical notation. In this paper, I would like to present and discuss a case study of music archaeology focusing on wind instruments dating back to the Roman age. A few years ago, during the excavation of the Roman village of Vicus Abentia, the modern village of Voghenze, close to Ferrara in northern Italy, the remains of a building of about 119 square meters came to light. This is the map where is Voghenze on the border of Adriatic Sea. The village was in a very strategic position because it was placed close to the Po River that was connected through a very efficient channel system with the village of Classe, where the seat of the imperial fleet was based. In the 7 rooms of the building, archaeologists found numerous objects, including vases, mortars, oil lamps, and some coins, which allowed them to date the building around the end of the 2nd century CE. Here you have the objects, some different objects made of bronze. And moreover, in a sort of storeroom, together with several fragments of bronze objects, a diploma of onesta missio and fragments of a bronze trumpet came to light. The diploma of onesta missio, you can see here, was the attestation of the honorable discharge from the military service in the Roman Empire. It was written on a bronze plate and included the name of the honorably discharged soldier, and the diploma found in Voghenze was given by the Emperor Trajan to the Dalmatian Lucius Benius Beuzza, a veteran of the fleet of Classe close to Ravenna. After 26 years of military service in the Ravenna fleet, on June 12, 100 AD, Beuzza received from the emperor the discharge from the military service, the Roman citizenship from himself and family, and the acknowledgement of his union with his wife Mocha. In his new life as a civilian, he also brought the musical instrument that had probably characterized his long military service. The bronze wind instrument, you can see here on display now at the museum, found in Voghenze, certainly represent an unicum among the evidences of the Roman bronze aerophones. It consists of 2 parts, the cup-shaped mouthpiece, you can see it here, the cup-shaped mouthpiece made of cast bronze, long 19 centimeters, and it is slightly curved, and the tube is made of bronze foil, and it was about 130 centimeters long, of a slightly curved shape, and flared at the end. A small bronze ring has also come to light, which originally had to be fixed to the pavilion of the instruments. Maybe the trumpeter inserted it in a rope in order to play or to carry it more easily. At present, a research group is studying this archaeological finding, also with the help of the digital technologies. And the project, which involves the University of Bologna, Padua, and Salento, has already realized the 3D scanning of the fragments of the instruments to enable a virtual and material reconstruction with 3D printing. Here you can see the mouthpiece. And it is the very, very special detail is that is very slightly curved, and here the reconstruction of the shape of the trumpet. The evidence concerning the Roman bronze aerophones belong essentially to two types. The tube, with a straight tube flared at the bottom, like this one. You have here two examples coming from the Roman Gaul, and the cornua. Here you have the cornua, with a circular shape ending in a pavilion, characterized by the presence along the diameter of a wooden crossbar to facilitate the handle. The example from Voghenze, because of its particular shape, doesn't seem to fit neither to the tube nor the cornua, which are well documented by contemporary evidence dating to the end of the 1st century AD. The evidence of trumpet is very rare, and we can see this. There are two or three examples. These examples are among the findings available now. But we have numerous cornua, like this, and mostly we have mouthpieces of cornua, which were made of cast bronze and removable, and they came to light mostly in the location of the military camps along the northern borders of the Roman empires. Here you have some example of mouthpiece of this kind of aerophone. The cup-shaped mouthpiece of our trumpet, except for the slight curvature, is instead similar to the cornu. The particular shape of this trumpet recalls more than the coeval Roman instrument some Etruscan bronze trumpets found in funerary context and date between the 3rd and 2nd century BC, and which are therefore some centuries older. Even the Celtic trumpets, we have an example, founded in Ireland, have a shape similar to that to Voghenze, but they are very different from it. Since they don't have a mobile mouthpiece, their pavilion ends with a decorated disc, and the two parts of their tube are joined by a means of a permanent fastener. And there was also a bronze ring fixed to the pavilion in our Voghenze example, and this detail reminds the Celtic trumpet you have here, about 70 centimeters long, and which the pavilion twisted backward. And this kind of instrument came to light in Germany, in the basin of the River Main. The iconography may offer a closer comparison. Even through later example, for instance, the mosaic decorating the reception room in a palace in Faenza, a village close to Ferrara, to Ravenna, so very close to our instrument in Voghenze, dating back the 5th century CE. Here, the trumpet is associated with the military contest, being attributed to the soldier who appear in one of the panels surrounding a central emblem. Probably the Emperor Honorius sitting on the throne. Even though this later iconographic example is more recent even this example is more recent, of almost 4 centuries, nevertheless it is very meaningful since it's come from the same area of the Voghenze example. And there are other examples. Here, for example, here you have a mosaic coming from Tunisia and the town of Gafsa. And you can see this kind of trumpet slightly curved, very long, like a tuba, but with this slight curvature here, and also here in the mosaic of the villa of Lucius Verus in Rome. Of course, the bronze trumpets in Roman time, in Roman world, in Roman civilization, were primarily used in the military context, both to give signals and transmit to the troops the order given by the officers. You have here several examples, and to accompany the ritual occasions in the battlefields and in the camp. Here you have this special use in this detail from the Colonna Traiana in Rome. You have here the military camp and the cornicines and tubicines playing during this ritual to bless the camp. Literary epigraphy and iconographic evidences provide information on the musicians of the army and let us know that they held important positions within the military hierarchies and were gathered in association, the collegia. Funerary inscription of the Tubician primus from the Alpine Corps, you have here, is an example coming from your museum in Sarajevo. This primus, son of Titus, was a trumpeter, a tubician. The activity of the musicians who played the different type of bronze trumpets, the so-called enatores, was not limited to the military field. Because of the loud sounds of their instruments, able to be heard even in open and noisy spaces, they played on occasion of different types of shows, such as, for example, the gladiators' fights in the amphitheater. This is a mosaic coming from Zliten in Libya. And here you have the 5 cornua coming from Pompeii, because Pompeii, of course, it was not a military place, but they were found close to the Domus Gladiatoria. So the domus where the gladiators were placed. Different kind of show, this gladiatorial fights in the amphitheater, the sport competition. Here you have the sport competition is coming from Gafsa, Tunis, this mosaic with the detail of the Tubician, and also in the chariot race. Here you are in Piazza Armerina in Sicily, the Villa del Casale in Piazza Armerina. In addition to the above-mentioned context of use, we know that the bronze wind instrument players, the ainatores, had an important role to announce and call people on the occasion of the public assemblies and civic ceremonies taking place in the Roman cities. And here you have another example. Here is a bronze statuette from, it's in the Sarajevo Museum of a cornician. And you see that it is not dressed like a soldier, but is a civilian person. So probably not probably, but we have evidence that this kind of wind instrument also were used during these civic ceremonies in the town, and also coming back. These are the context of use of this kind of wind instruments, both military and civilian. And here, coming back to Voghenze, considering the place where it was found, a domus, it was a domus, not a military place, we may argue that also in this case the trumpet could provide music for the civic events taking place in this village. Actually, on the basis of these findings, scholars suggest that the building was not a private domus, but rather a scola, that is the seat of a professional association. We can also imagine that this musical instrument belonged to Lucius Ennius Beutza himself. In fact, according to the literary and epigraphic evidence, also among the sailors of the Roman fleet there were trumpet players. Here you have, for example, an example coming from the poem Pharsalia by Lucan, for example, where Pompey, to fool the enemy, recommends that the bucina doesn't beat the hours and that the tuba doesn't forewarn the sailor to take off. Also, another evidence in the text of the poet Martial, speaking of the naval battles organized by Augustus, mentioned the naval tuba, tuba navali. And the presence of bucinatores on triremes is also attested by a few inscriptions. Here you have, for example, an inscription of this Caius Arius Montanus, who was a Cornican in the fleet based at Misenus, where the this inscription came from. And in conclusion, also this last inscription appear in a long inscription from San Lorenzo in Caesarea near Classe, close to Ravenna, so close to the seat, close to Classe, where the fleet of Augustan emperor was based. And here you have a catalog in which are given names of sailors divided in several military ranks, and among them also the aenatores, cornicines, tubicines, and bucinatores. In conclusion, we can propose the hypothesis that this musical instrument belonged to this Dalmatian sailor, Lucius Ennius Beutza himself. It was a veteran of the Roman fleet. Once retired, he would have made available the instrument and the technical skills to play it for civic purposes. Concerning the name of the instrument, we know for sure that it was not the rounded cornu, neither the straight tuba. Some scholars suggest to identify this archaeological finding with the bucina, a kind of trumpet cited very often in the written sources, also in this inscription. It is very often cited, this bucina, but it is very difficult to be identified in the visual art. This instrument, this bucina, since we don't know what it looked like. We don't know what his shape and his features. But the identification of ancient musical instrument by associating the definition we find in text with the archaeological evidence is one of the most challenging problems for musicologists dealing with antiquity. And this is also true for the Voghenze trumpet. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. It's always fascinating to see instrument, and especially when you have a person who was playing this instrument from antiquity, that you have a name associated with the instrument. Are there any questions? We have a few minutes for questions. Jelka.
Thank you. Just a short question regarding the musician. Is the conclusion that he was in fact a soldier or a sailor who played the instrument, or that he was a musician who was employed by the Navy as a musician?
Yes, usually is the first option. They were soldiers and also they were musicians, but usually they were professional because they were gathered in this collegia. And but in this special case, we don't know, because usually in the diploma never is specified the kind of hierarchy of the soldiers, just the corps which belong soldiers, but not the special hierarchy. So we don't know. We only know that it is coming from Dalmatia, and he had military service in the legion, but we don't know more.
Other questions? If not, thank you very much. And we can move to the second paper by Michał S. Is he here? I guess not.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Oh, it's online presentation.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I would like to present my own presentation. I'll try to show. Okay, can you see my presentation on the screen?
No, we cannot.
Okay, because I'm sharing my screen now in the Zoom, on the Zoom platform. So maybe if you can allow me to show you my presentation on your big screen. Because on my computer, I see the presentation. So please, could you also show it for the audience? Okay. Okay. I'll try to share the screen. Oh, I see I have no, oh yes. Now I have this option to share the screen. Okay. Okay, great. And what about now? Can you see now my screen, my presentation?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now I can start. Great. Mantua is a city in northern Italy. In the 1570s, this small state was home to around 25,000 people. Why did the Renaissance Gonzaga court become one of the most important musical centers? The small political potential was outweighed by the successful realization of the rulers' ambitions. Generous patronage allowed the rulers of Mantua to build up their prestige. In the 15th century, works with ancient themes began to be produced in Mantua. Gonzaga patronage in this century was focused on the fine arts, but theatrical music finds its vivid connection with mythology here. For example, in a representation painted by Andrea Mantegna in 1497. In the painting depicting Parnassus, the 9 muses dance or sing to the sounds emanating from the lyre of the god of music. Mantua also intensified its collaboration with famous humanists. One such prominent person was Angelo Poliziano. Research into the Fabula di Orfeo to the words of Poliziano is still full of questions, ambiguities, and unresolved hypotheses. However, a few of the most likely findings should be highlighted. The text of Orpheus was written not in 1472, as previously thought, but between 1478 and 1479 in connection with the celebrations planned for the following year to mark the formalization of the betrothal of Chiara Gonzaga to Gilberto di Montpensier. This was a significant political event for the Whig Gonzaga state. Orpheus was based on an original and complex mix of classical texts. Some scholars have tried to place the performance of the work in 1480. They suggested that the work contained spoken dialogues with simple solo and choral songs composed by an unknown composer. It was also thought that more than half of the 406 verses of the text were sung and that the role of Orpheus was performed by Baccio Guglini, a priest who was known to sing with his own accompaniment on the lyra da braccio. However, Fabula the author was unlikely to be performed on the stage because of the serious mourning that was being experienced in Mantua following the death on 12 October 1479 of Margherita Gonzaga, wife of the Marquis Federico. The mourning involved a total ban on celebrations, performances, and balls at court throughout the year. Nevertheless, the text itself became popular in court circles. In the dedication, Poliziano indicates that he arranged the work at the request of the Mantuan Cardinal Francesco Gonzaga. The poet also stressed that he had specifically written his favola in a lower style, volgare, so that the recipients could better understand it. The choice of this particular myth may have been suggested by Cardinal Gonzaga, exercising theatrical patronage, or by his relatives. The message of the story of Orpheus, as told by Poliziano, is the praise of conjugal love along with a blunt moral and pedagogical interpretation. The author of the text included his version of the myth in the restored convention of the satirical drama, which is characterized by a combination of comic and mirthful elements, but with an aspiration for a happy ending to the plot. The brutal tearing apart of Orpheus by the Bacchantes is justified by Orpheus' contempt for marriage and simultaneous praise of homosexual love between men. The murder of an opponent of marriage, thus, appears in this historical context as radical and violent, but right and necessary to maintain fundamental law and social order. A less scholarly section of the audience might have remained at the level of affirming marriage and condemning love between men. The erudite might have sought Neoplatonic echoes of the philosopher Marsilio Ficino's ideas. The death of Orpheus is a recovery of common morality. The killing of the scapegoat allows the community to regain a sense of the ethical rightness of the relationship between men and women. The fine overtone points to the message that love should be pursued in accordance with the biblical law that operates in early modern European society. The punishment of Bacchus is thus meant to reflect the justice of the Christian God. A breakthrough for musical culture came with the arrival of Isabella d'Este at the Mantuan court. She arrived in February 1490 as a 16-year-old and married Francesco II Gonzaga, ushering in one of the most dazzling periods in the musical life of Mantua. The court poet Niccolò da Correggio described her as la prima donna del mondo, which may have been linked to her excellent education knowledge of Greek and Latin. She is known to have recited texts by Terentius or Virgil from memory. At the same time, she surrounded herself with a circle of artists and intellectuals. Isabella d'Este was musically educated, as evidenced, among other things, by a testimony that the poet Gian Giorgio Trissino wrote down in 1514. Quote, "But every time Isabella sings, especially accompanied by a lute, I firmly believe that Orpheus and Amphion, who were able to bring inanimate objects to life with their songs, hearing her would be amazed. And there is no doubt that one of them could do it as well as she does when she chooses her harmonies carefully, so that the rhythm never stops, but measures the tempo of the singing, once rising, once falling, keeping in tune with the sound of the lute." End of quote. Such praise fits the convention of flattering those in power, but placing Isabella's singing above that of mythical heroes draws attention. It is particularly significant that Orpheus and his superhuman abilities in singing and playing an instrument are placed below the ruler. She is thus placed above the excellence of the Apollonian son, who was known to the Mantuan court from mythological representations from the second half of the 15th century. In 1486, the Rappresentazione di Febo, or Daphne, a musical drama in the style previously proposed by Angelo Poliziano, was staged. The music was composed by Gian Pietro della Viola, a Florentine musician who was associated with the Gonzaga court on various occasions in the 1418s. The musical notation has not survived. At the end of 1490, Francesco Gonzaga planned the first or possibly subsequent performance of Orfeo by Poliziano. The role of Orfeo was played by Atalante Miglioretti, a singer and instrument builder who played the lyre da braccio. Miglioretti was in the employ of Cardinal Giovanni de Medici. Eventually, the performance was postponed until the following year and performed during the visit of Duke Ercole d'Este, as the main actor could not come at the previously proposed date. Ercole Albergati, known as Zarafano, and Filippo Lapaccino were responsible for preparing the performance. Albergati was an actor, director, and set designer from Bologna. Lapaccino, on the other hand, is an enigmatic figure with residual information about him. It is known that he was born in Florence and was described as a singer, poet, priest, and organist, as well as the hypothetical year 1480. No score survives from 1492. On page 46 of a 1968 publication entitled "A Renaissance Entertainment, Festivities for the Marriage of Cosimo I, Duke of Florence," its authors included a list of performances of musical and theatrical performances from various Italian centers. A number of them concern Mantua. The already discussed Orfeo by Poliziano appears with a performance date that is no longer valid. Then in 1486, the authors of the publication point to the Rappresentazione di Febo Epitone, which also said. However, subsequent performances involving music are problematic. In 1493, the authors pointed to a performance under the title La Semidea, or the Half Goddess to Words by Niccolò da Correggio, However, no commentary was included as to where the information about this mythological performance came from and which demigoddess it might refer to. This would be followed in 1495 by a performance of Scene Mitologiche, to words by Serafino Aquilano. The mythological theme is indicated in the title, but it is not clear which exact scene it is. Again, however, there is no detailed explanation by the authors to indicate the source of the information about this event. My paper deals with the second half of the 15th century, so I will only mention that my mythological performances in Mantua have a continuation in the following century. Already at the beginning of the 16th century, there was a performance of Nozze di Cupidine, or Cupid's Wedding, to words by Galeotto del Carretto and music by Tromboncino. Bartolomeo Tromboncino is the most famous and innovative of the composers working in the frottoli genre. At the time, Tromboncino was composing music for court theatrical shows and festivals in Mantua. The music for this performance has also not survived to our times. The patronage of the Mantuan rulers fundamentally influenced the further development of secular music in Italy. I hope that my presentation has contributed to an understanding of the attitude of the people of the time towards the heritage of antiquity and how antiquity was reinvented for musical theater. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We wish that you were here with us. It would be nice to have a direct contact with you. Are there any questions?
I just want to make a note. Hi, Michał. Could we see you? Because it could be possibly. Could you switch on the camera so we can say hello?
Yes, I would like to. Yeah, I would like to. I tried, but I see notification that I can't turn on video because it was stopped by the organizers. So I would like to. So if you can change that, I would like to.
Checking with our technical team. What do you think?
Okay.
Okay, let's try.
Okay, I'm trying, but
it's not working.
Not work. Okay, it's still not working.
Okay, apologies. Then we will have to see you on another occasion. It was a technical issue that we didn't anticipate at this point.
So, yeah, I'm
still
first trying.
Session. Anyway, we thank you very much for your participation. And if some of the colleagues have some questions for you while we are sorting out the technical issues, yes, Zdravko, please take over.
Are there any questions?
Our colleagues say that you should stop the share screen in order for the video to work.
Okay.
I don't know why.
So I'm trying again, but I still see this notification. I can't.
Okay, we will work with it later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? If not, I think we should thank you for the presentation, and I hope that at the next edition of this conference you come and be with us.
Thank you so much. I would love to come from Poland, from Warsaw to Sarajevo. Thank you so much.
And we can move to the next paper by Rolf Norsen. And the title is Klemangerneken and Changing Social Context in the early modern era. close for the camera. That's why I put it up.
Nearly everyone that has written about Jánekán has noticed that his career path was unusual. The details that accompany these observations are often flawed. Jánekán is said to have never had a cathedral post, when in fact he did so in Luçon, in Auch, and in Angers. He is pictured as perennially destitute, which in view of the considerable earnings he had from music printing is an oversimplification at best. And on the slimmest of evidence, he is credited with having been in the service of a wide range of wealthy patrons, while in fact only Bordeaux law professor Lancelot Dufault seems to have figured as his long-term protector. Nevertheless, the idea that Jánekán's career was unusual remains valid. The way he interacted with the church, with patrons, and with the fledgling music printing industry was unlike that of any other composer, any previous composer. It has been traditional in Jánekán studies to divide his career into 3 units based on geography: a period in Bordeaux, a period in Angers, and a period in Paris. I would submit that we can make more sense of Jánekán's career if we consider instead the social and economic contexts within which he worked and the consequences these had for his creative output. In short, who paid his bills and what did they expect in return? From 1507 until 1523, I think Jánekán earned his keep as a composer and performer of entertainment music. 2 kinds of evidence support this assertion. Both are circumstantial and both are compelling. The first is that all his earliest compositions are entertainment music. Everything that Attagnan published in his early collections by Jánekán is secular, and much of it is marvelously theatrical. Indeed, it is difficult to imagine that anyone could have written works of the quality, complexity, and audience appeal of the Song of the Birds or the Battle of Marignan without himself having been a performer. The second is that in spite of his eventual status as a priest, during this early period, Jánekán produced no sacred music whatsoever. His musical training, of course, would have been as a choir boy, and he did serve for a short time as master of the Saulette in Luçon until authorities there tired of his extracurricular attention to certain local ladies. But almost 2 decades would pass before he wrote anything whatsoever for church use. Parallel to this, ecclesiastical records up to 1523 are remarkably silent. No appointments, no prepends, no reprimands. Instead, documents connect Jánekán with a wealthy and influential Bordeaux prelate and law professor, Lancelot Dufault, who certainly had the means and perhaps also the motivation to maintain an in-house arranger of musical entertainments. All this changed following the death of Lancelot Dufault in 1523, and there is no question but that Jánekán was supported financially by the church during the period that followed. He was now an ordained priest, and there are a rich selection of documents from the period describing prebends, assignments, debts, loans, and interpriestly squabbling over ecclesiastical appointments. If the evidence of church support in this period is ample, however, the evidence that this support led to a renewed focus on the production of sacred music is less convincing. Indeed, of the 2 sacred publications from this period for which Jánekán is known, one of them is certainly not his. The Mass published by Jacques Moderne in Lyon in 1532 with Janicane's name clearly etched at the top of the page, is without a doubt based on Janicane's famous battle chanson. It is, however, an uncharacteristic stylistic pastiche, probably assembled by Modern's editor, Francesco Leol, with an eye toward capitalizing on the popularity of the original chanson. The collection of motets, published by Pierre Etienne in 1533, on the other hand, is clearly by Jacquin. Perhaps instigated by François Clermont-Lodève, the ambitious and liturgically focused cardinal and Archbishop of Auch, for whom Janican worked briefly around 1531, or perhaps a calling card connected with his appointment as leader of the cathedral choir in Angers. The motet collection is Janican's only sacred effort up to that point, and would remain so until he moved to Paris 16 years later. Janican lived in Angers for 16 years, from 1533 to 1548. Officially, he was the curé of a congregation just outside the city walls and director of the choir at Saint-Maurice in Angers. In reality, a substitute took care of Janican's parishioners, and his assistant soon took over the cathedral choir, leaving Janican free to spend time with local aristocrats and to compose. Three things stand out from Janican's time in Angers. First, our composer seems not to have been in any great hurry. During these 16 years, Pierre Etienne published 110 chansons by Janican, which amounts to about one new chanson every 2 months. Second, in spite of living off his ecclesiastical prebends, all the chansons he wrote in this period were unabashedly secular, some of them outrageously so. Finally, although his earnings from these publications would have constituted a pleasant occasional bonus, they could impossibly have been a decisive factor in his personal finances. Indeed, what he earned and what it cost him to maintain contact with his publisher in Paris may have been close to the same. In 1548, at well past the age of 60, Janican abandoned the comforts of Angers and moved to Paris. Why? Things were changing at several levels. At the national level, King Francis I died after a lengthy illness. Janican had served Francis long and well, but always from a distance. And in spite of the dissemination of Janican's battle chanson across Europe, no call inviting the composer to Francis' court ever materialized. With the advent of a new king, however, new opportunities to serve the court were opening up. And if Janican was finally going to achieve recognition and support from the court, he needed to act. In addition, a new king meant a redistribution of the privileges granted music printers. And since Pierre Etienne was approaching the end of his career, Janican needed to develop new relations on that front as well. With the move to Paris, then, a new economic strategy emerges. Janican would preserve some limited support from the church, but he would make printing revenues the central and decisive element of his strategy. It was a brave plan because, as far as we know, he was the first composer to make the attempt. Did he succeed? Our knowledge of the cost of living in Paris at this time is limited, but a document from 1555 tells us that the composer paid 48 livres tournois a year for his lodgings, while a document from 1558 notes that he promised his housekeeper 12 livres a year. If we posit that his food costs were equal to what he paid in rent, and add a bit for ink, paper, and candles, then Janican's minimum annual requirements were in the neighborhood of 125 livres. He could count on 50 livres from his one remaining prebend. So, to survive, Žaneka needed to earn at least 75 livres annually from his publishing activities. Our estimates of his revenues are necessarily hypothetical, but if we accept that a print run of 1,000 copies was not unusual, that the price of a book of printed music ran close to a half livre, and that the composer's share may have been about a tenth of the cost of the book, we can make a rough calculation of what Žanekan's returns might have been. When we do so, it is immediately apparent that for Žanekan's economic strategy to succeed, he needed to increase his composing tempo drastically, and this is in fact what happened. He continued to write secular music at the same rate as before, but after having produced only 12 units of sacred music during the first 63 years of his life, in the 9 years in Paris, he produces no less than 162 units of sacred music, including a mass, a new group of motets, several spiritual chansons, and a veritable sea of psalm and proverb settings. This increased productivity, however, came at a price. Publishing as much as possible meant writing what the market wanted. And at the moment, the market wanted devotional music, simple note against note settings of pre-existing melodies that were sometimes appealing and sometimes pedestrian. The psalm settings of 1549, the proverbs of 1558, and the psalm settings published in 1559 are all subject to these constraints, with no room for the finely wrought imitation, rhythmic vivacity, and formal variety that were the hallmarks of Žanekan's secular successes. Apparently, Žaneka did finally receive recognition from the court. Starting in 1555, he called himself Ordinary Singer to the King. And in 1557, he dedicated an entire psalm collection to the Queen, Catherine de' Medici. Symptomatically, however, when he wrote his will in January of 1558, it included a polite reminder that the court was behind in their payments. And if Žaneka suffered the same fate as many other court dependents, royal influence on the composer's finances may have been limited, to say the least. If Žanekan's strategy for making printing revenues a central part of his strategy for survival can be judged to have succeeded, if only just, what can be said about the influence this strategy had on the kind and quality of music he produced during its implementation? When it comes to the chansons he wrote during the last 9 years of his life, both the smaller lyric and ribald chanson and the larger descriptive efforts are of the same high quality as those he wrote in previous periods. When it comes to the music he wrote in motet style, sadly, we are not likely ever to know, as none of these have survived in a complete state. It is when we consider the commercially motivated collections in hymn style that the gulf between the imagination, the vitality, and the craftsmanship of other efforts by Žaneka comes into stark contrast with the constraints of the devotional genre as it developed in the late 1550s. We can certainly not fault Žaneka for accepting the limits which this repertory put on his creative genius. But at the same time, we cannot help but wonder what the results might have been if Catherine de' Medici had delved deeper into the royal treasury and moved the aging composer into circumstances that provided a greater challenge and inspiration to his creativity and craftsmanship. Thank you.
It's really nice to hear a paper based on solid archival work, because we don't do that too often.
Thank you.
So thank you for showing us how to read economics of composers. Are there questions? Leon.
Thank you very much. It was extremely interesting to hear this economical perspective. So could you compare Jeannequin to different composers from the 16th century? Because I know for Jacobus Gallus it was actually an interesting hidden thing to find out that he was very successful businessman as well. And I guess he was not the only one, and Jeannequin certainly not the only one. So are there more perspectives?
He is comparing Jeannequin to Jacobus Gallus, who was a businessman in his dealings with publishers. So are there more composers who were doing this? Did I interpret it correctly?
Yes. Are there more composers
who were basing their livelihood on publishing income?
There were, of course, composers in the period who made a lot of money. And Claude Sermessi obviously made a lot of money. Claude Sermessi was the composer for the Royal Chapel, and he was well paid by the king and the court. The difference between Sermessi and Jeannequin, of course, is that Sermessi could write what and if he felt like it and not have to worry about whether the thing sold. He had 2 houses in town and 5 houses in the country. So his motivations were personal, you might say. Jeannequin, on the other hand, he had to do what the publishers asked. When he came to Paris in 1549, it was Nicolas Duchemin who was his publisher. And Nicolas Duchemin had noticed all of these came to be known as the Genevan melodies. And some of our most beloved hymns were part of this. Dum, pum, 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 pum. That's one of them. There were 183 of them after a while. And some of those melodies were great. Some of them rise and fall and they have a nice shape and you can work with them. Some of them are repetitious. But Nicolas Duchemin, he had noticed that these melodies were selling. The Berger brothers in Lyon were doing a good business of selling psalm tunes. So what happened was the psalm melodies came in one book, and then the composers took the melody, put it in one of the voices, and then added the 3 other voices, and then you could sell that to people who were musically illiterate. Dad, who could read, he read the tenor part. No, the kids and everyone else, they sang the melody. So if you had 3 people who could read music, and then the rest of the devotional group they sang the melody, and the 3 who could read music sang the harmony. So what you get is you get simple harmonizations. And of course, if the raw material is not interesting, well, not to put a fine point on it, you're screwed. I'm running over my time here.
Let's see, are there any questions? I have one. Such a situation with that you depend on livelihood from publications, has that affected the dissemination of sources, that we do not have a manuscripts of Jeanne, or we do have a manuscript because he was trying to publish everything, or not? In the situation of sources, is everything by Jeanne published, or there are also manuscripts that he could not have published?
There are, ironically, there are lots and lots of manuscripts of the Mass he did not write. He did write a Mass. You will see in the encyclopedias that he is credited with 0 Masses or with 2 Masses. Neither of those is correct. He wrote 1 Mass in 1554 at the behest of Claude Goudimel, who was editor for Duchemin at that time. The other Mass, the one he did not write, is this thing that I mentioned about from Francesco de Laïol and Jacques Moderne in 1532. And ironically, this one has been copied into several Masses, many of them Italian. And what that reflects is that the boys in the choir loft didn't have enough money to buy the printed things, but they had good friends in the other churches, so they said, "Can I loan your Mass?" So, well, we have 2 copies of the Mass that Jeanne did write, and we have 9 manuscript copies of the one that he didn't write.
Yeah,
okay.
That is also significant.
Yeah.
How that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are moving back to our geographic region, to the Balkans. Next paper is by Alessia Zangrando, Balkan Music in 17th Century Travelogues, The Voyage of Sir Poulet and Monsieur Quiclet.
Yes, thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this interesting symposium and the scientific committee for giving me the opportunity to present my research. So in line with the research on travel reports as sources for the study of music between antiquity and the Middle Ages, started also almost 30 years ago, this paper consists of an example, a case study, of the first results of my PhD project, the aim of which is to identify and analyze the musical events reported in travel accounts relating to the contact with the others, people who are distant in a chronological, geographical, or cultural sense, often lacking a written musical tradition. This research is in fact centered on the musical events contained in travel reports, for instance, embassy accounts, letters, diaries, illustrations, etc., dating from the 15th to the 18th century. And in geographical terms, I am considering the travels across southeastern Europe, specifically, mainly, but not only, the Slavic-speaking countries. The reason for the travelers passing through these territories were the most varied, from pleasure trips and explorations to commercial, religious, and diplomatic assignments. Sometimes, however, the reasons for the journey are unclear or not made explicit, as in this case study, which considers the travels of Poulet, or Sieur Poulet, or just Poulet with the initial A, an almost unknown Frenchman, whom the Biographie Universelle Ancienne et Moderne claims was sent to the East as an appointee for some sort of mission related to military art, a hypothesis perhaps inspired by the fact that the author mentions several times the mathematical instruments he kept hidden in the false bottom of his trunk. The Biographie Universelle, which draws from the same account, also mentions some of the stages of his journey, which, thanks to Google Earth, we see to be rather extensive. Poulet set off from Paris towards Marseille, then sailed to Italy, which he crossed as far as Venice, from where he then set off for the Balkan Peninsula. So, sailing the coast of Istria, Dalmatia, and then going towards the hinterland through Bosnia, Serbia, Bulgaria. And once in Turkey, he continued on to Iran, then up to Iraq, Syria, and Egypt, before returning to France. The Biographie Universelle also reports that, despite the pompous title of the work, the text is one of the most insignificant of those dealing with the countries considered, and that Poulet is said to have been more interested in politics than geography, forgetting even to mention the years of departure and return. In truth, the missing or erroneous data reported by the Biographie Universelle do not correspond in many cases to those inferable from Poulet's text, as well as that of his traveling companion, Monsieur Quickley, the king's interpreter in Turkish, from whom Poulet was separated in Dubrovnik and who died in Constantinople, thrown from the walls of the French embassy for having betrayed diplomatic information, a murder that should not have gone unnoticed, as it can be found in several sources, such as in Chevalier Chardin's travel account published in 1686, which describes the dynamics of the homicide. Quickley, who followed the same route as Poulet through the Balkans, in turn compiled an account of his adventures, which of course does not include the return trip, and which was published posthumously in 1664. The narrative also starts directly from Venice, which, as you can maybe see here, or maybe you just believe me, which he specified he sailed on the 23rd of December 1657 on their way to Ragusa, Dubrovnik. Regarding the musical, or in a broader sense, the sound events, it was possible to identify some 15 of these in both Quickley's and Poulet's texts, for a total of 30 mentions. Quickley is certainly more concise, but often also more precise, as he usually mentions both dates and places. Poulet, on the contrary, is generally more vague about this kind of information, but goes into greater length in describing the characteristics of the events he witnesses. On the whole, these events can mainly be traced back to religious ceremonies, town festivals, and military parades, including here also dance performances, musical objects or instruments, and, to conclude, non-musical events. Regarding the first category, in just one case, Poulet and Quickley attended and described the same event, geographically and temporally unspecified in Poulet's case, involving worshippers singing prayers half in Latin, half in Slavonic, at the top of their voices. Later on, perhaps referring to the same celebration, Poulet then describes a dance performance in which the dancers, clasping each other's arms in a non-stop movement lasting 4 or 5 hours, are accompanied by the sung narration of the entire Old Testament or the history of the Turks, full of praises to the one and imprecations against the others, in a progressive crescendo, which results in such an agitation that it creates palpitations and foaming at the dancer's mouth in an unparalleled confusion. Quickly specifies that the above-mentioned ceremony was held on the 15th of January in the village of Rogoznica in Dalmatia, and that the Mass was sung by the priest in the Slavonic language, the Epistyle and the Gospel and some other prayers. But the rest, such as the Gloria in Excelsis and the Creed and other prayers, were sung in Latin. As for the dance described by Poulet, Quickly makes no mention of it, but in an earlier passage he states that he witnessed a more lax dance in Istria at Cape Kamenjak on the 26th of December, thus several days earlier, without, however, detailing the event. Further on, Poulet, now separated from Quickly, is persuaded to take the more Turkish name of Ibrahim Bek, and notes the need to adapt to the habits of these people and consequently also to their pastimes, which he sums up as playing, singing, dancing, and drinking in a manner reminiscent of the Sabbath, adding later that such an attitude in Europe would certainly have taken them to trial for witchcraft. Clearly, from their entry into Bosnia, and thus leaving the Venetian domains, Poulet and Quickly highlighted especially the characteristics of Muslim rituals and the differences between these and Jewish, Armenian, and Christian traditions, as in the case of the description of a Turkish funeral, which we also find depicted in the Recueil de Saint-Estampe, published in 1714, quoted here as an iconographic comparison. So Poulet describes the event by stating that the same grimaces of grief are also made for the funerals of Greek and Jews, but that the former play violins along the way, while the latter still add dancing, and that after they have cried, they take on a serious attitude, which they animate to the sound of the instruments, moving on to shouts and dancing until they have returned to their homes. Quickly mentions also two events that occurred in Sarajevo. The first is related to the spinning dances of the Turks, accompanied by prayers and the sound of the drums. The second, on the right side, refers to the great parade that preceded the Pasha's departure for the front, to the sound of 7 or 8 kinds of drums, a 5-string lute, fifes, oboes, and 2 çigurs, a kind of Turkish lute with 5 strings. He also notes that 2 men were near him, near the Pasha, singing songs in the Turkish language. As far as non-musical events are concerned, these often involve natural sounds such as the rumbling of the wind in the mountains or the tolling of rocks, the rolling of rocks, the tolling of bells, the firing of blanks as a sign of greeting or used to indicate the beginning of Ramadan, and the voice of the muezzin to call the faithful to prayer, etc. These also include an experience Poulet witnessed in Split and related to the ritual of coffee. The black bitter drink made from beans that grow in Egypt is sipped from a small boiling porcelain cup. The author is fascinating by the grimacing, gurgling, and twisting of the mouth that his guests are led to make due to the high temperature of the liquid, to the point of stating that if Scaramouche, one of the masks of the Commedia dell'arte, organized a Turkish banquet, he would certainly make more money. With the same irony, Poulet also points out the use of playing a particular instrument called a taburat, probably a string instrument of the family of the tambura or tamburica, widespread in these areas. And he compares its body to one of the clogs, the wooden shoes, used by French peasants. He then explains that the neck is long as the 3/4 of an arm, and no more than 2 fingers wide, and that 3 brass strings pass over it, which the musicians pluck with the aid of a small piece of feather. He then follows with observations on playing technique and claims that, that they try to make up for their mistakes through the amount of touches with which they make their chords. A little further on, he also states that the singing on these occasions is comparable to the howling and winging of the dog when it sees its master again. So, as you can see, some unclear and technically imprecise observations. He then describes a kind of castanets or clappers used by some dancers, presenting such objects as wooden spoons with feather-thin handles long about half an arm. During the performance, these objects are raised above the head and moved with the fingers. In the meantime, the dancers follow almost in synchrony with the cadence of the feet, in a sort of saraband, as he says, as they rotate by pivoting on the left foot and incessantly moving the right one. Here, the term saraband does not refer to the specific musical form, but rather to a chaotic situation, sequence of movements and noise. And so this makes us think that probably Poulet is not an expert. Quickly also describes the instruments used during religious ceremonies or village festivals in several passages, but his words emphasize much less the gap between the local cultures and traditions and those of Western Europeans. In general, however, a clear Eurocentric perspective certainly emerges from the 2 accounts considered, as well as from many others. In fact, authors emphasize in a more or less marked way this cultural and musical distance with the Balkan peoples, frequently identified as generically Levantine, Turkish, or Slavic, and often without contextualizing the events in a precise place or culture. In conclusion, these accounts provide a wealth of information, especially of musicological and organological interest, which must certainly be contextualized and interpreted without the Eurocentric filter, distinguishing the various local musical traditions or identifying, if possible, their multicultural composition, to eventually shed new light on the Balkan sound ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessia. It's always nice to learn about the new source about us. Any questions? Stanko.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interesting paper. Just one question concerning the reports on music they heard in the provinces of Istria and Dalmatia. They just mentioned the difference in language, Slavic language or Latin language, concerning religious ceremonies, of course, when priests were singing. Did they mention any characteristics different of the music they heard sung in Slavic or sung in Latin? Namely, obviously, it is a glagolitic tradition, which in musical aspect is very, very different from, let's say, the Roman Catholic repertoire.
Mm-hmm. No, in this case, as they are not, probably not musical experts, they just mention what they recognize. And so they didn't mention specific musical characteristics. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Yes. Over there at the back, I don't... Oh, online.
Hello?
Yes, please go on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Hi. Hi, this is Damir Imamovic from Sarajevo. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Can you please tell me about, usually among researchers, Poulet is considered to be very, like he was making things up, and Kikle was usually considered to be more precise and more reliable, just out of everything. But my idea is that Poulet mentions he's especially interested in, as much as I remember, in things like homosexuality, for example, in cities. He mentions that. And usually researchers treat him as not very reliable. And even Kikle at some point said that he parted way with Poulet because Poulet was unreliable or something like that. How would you consider that, and what are the other sources that you might maybe compare to Poulet? And another question: who were the other travelers, and were there other travelers in the region at that time from Western Europe? Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I lost the first part of your question, but I understood the last one, so I will start from there. So many travelers that I have considered come from Europe, especially from France, Italy, and sometimes from the Austrian countries. And sometimes they are experts, as in the case of Alberto Fortis, maybe you already know him, or Pietro della Valle. In other cases, as Poulet and Quiclet, they are just diplomats or simple travelers that just tell us what they see and what they hear. But now I would like to ask again the first part, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so usually what I encountered among researchers of the region, people who were digging in those manuscripts and old travel logs, was that Poulet was considered not that reliable. Mm-hmm. And Kikle is much more reliable. And even Kikle at some point says about Poulet that they had to part roads around Dubrovnik because he felt he wasn't that honest and stuff like that. What do you think about this relationship? Because Poulet mentions the number of things, among others, is local homosexual habits. And there's even this one episode in which he describes, I think in Mostar, how one of the Turks from his company literally bought a male child from a neighbor and used it sexually. Actually, a scene that somehow reappears in famous Ivo Andrić's Put Alije Đerzeleza, the travels of Alije Đerzeles. So what do you have to say about that context of reliability of Poulet, especially?
As you already said, Poulet is not always reliable, as often he doesn't know where he is and what he is seeing. But about the other event you mentioned, I didn't really examine such events. I focused on the musical part. But I don't know, are there any musical information about this event you're talking about?
No, but for me it's interesting about the whole context and his reliability. For example, when he talks about these instruments, he called them, I think, tambours or something like that, that have that are in the shape of a shoe of a Western peasant. I'm actually I'm never sure what is he talking about, because he's traveling with some Turks who speak Turkish among themselves. And since we know that most Muslims in Bosnia actually continued speaking Slavic vernacular and didn't usually speak Turkish among themselves, it might be that these tambours he's describing are, for example, coming from some other Levantine cities and towns, and were brought in by those Turks, by this particular group he was traveling like that with something like that.
Okay. Okay, yeah, definitely it is possible that he mix up everything, probably. In some cases, maybe he confused some places or some traditions, if that's what you mean.
I think we should wait for your finished dissertation about it because the time is running out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alessia. And now we come to the last paper for the morning, Patrick Huang. New Music in Antiquity, a comparative study of ancient Greek and Chinese traditions.
Let me try. Okay. Yeah. Hope you went well. So first of all, and thank you so much for giving this opportunity that I can. I'm so delightful that I can present here. And yep. Here. Okay. Okay. Like this. Better. Okay. Yeah. And also, like, I may need to go very quickly because I apologize that I initially expect for 20-minute presentation, but I realized I have only 15 minutes, and so I just go as quick as possible. And that will be mostly reading, but I can summarize the important points for the lack of time. So first of all, we will have the historical background that's around the classical period of ancient Greece and also the warring state of ancient China. So that's more or less like from the third century to 2nd century BC. And there seems to be like both simultaneously a change of the musical meaning, like on the function and purpose. So both regarded the previous music as more like political and educational function as an ancient music or old music, and consider the current more like popular music as a new music, that like they draw these distinctions of those traditions. So I'll just summarize quickly about the ancient Greek one. So it is more like a coined term. So new music is a concept that is coined by modern scholar. So in the ancient Greek period, they are mainly called as theater music or stage music, despite some relevant writings about like the new made music, Musan Neotelke, something like that, as opposed to like Palaya, like old-fashioned, or Archaeas, ancient, as like they use those terms to describe some sort of tradition, but there is not like a real new music genre as in modern period. So I will just quickly show some sources and the most important writings, and we are lucky that have the survived fragments of Timotheus, who is credited as the one of the pioneer of the new music tradition. And such tradition also affected the theatrical writings, because the tragedian Euripides is known for his late work adapting those new music for the accompaniment. So yeah, I just quickly have the translation. So this is the Greek in Timotheus, and it is a poetry, and he has some words like, because I dishonor the old music with my new hymns, something, but I bear no one. I just omitted because of lack of time. It is ancient music records that I kept off, outrageous of songs stretching out the shrieks of show of loud voice criers. So, and then he mentions several ancient Greek legendary figures and talking about, like, claiming legitimacy of his creation of new music is like following the path of those deities and legendary figures, legendary musicians. And another one is also more rebellious. I do not sing the old songs, for my new ones are better. Young Zeus rhymes, and it was the olden time that Kronos ruled. Away with the ancient muse. So more like a kind of revolutionary statement that he kind of write those newer style music, and also to show his kind of disguise with, not disguise, like kind of he's keeping distance with old music. But like you can imagine that such thought could be quite being against by the ancient philosophers, by like Plato and Aristotle, slightly later than Timotheus and Euripides, and he wrote in length in several writings. And Plato, when he mentioned about the theater music, and like it mentions that those characteristic of theater music becomes noisy and is of silence, so such new music, like kind of from the educational level, change the kind of minds of those who enjoy the theater music. I have to go quick. And also Aristotle's in Politics, in the very almost the later part, when he talks about the music and the educational purpose, and he also mentioned that in the sacred music we see the people that is more like it kind of use the tunes that violently arouse the soul, and but being thrown into a state that it has received medicinal treatment. So that's the good thing about the sacred music. But as a comparison for the theatrical music, so that's a completely different statement. So I just label them in bold. So that's a kind of like rather negative comments about those like theater music as opposed to the previous like sacred music. Also the later one, so Pseudo-Plutarch on music, that is quite later, because Plutarch is already like 400 something years later than Plato and Aristotle, and the Pseudo-Plutarch's treatise is like kind of dated as late as 3rd century AD, so far later. And this treatise summarized very in length about several comparisons in a kind of dialogue form about the old and new music, but I just quickly summarize. In some phrases, it talks about like despite the new music is more complicated in style, but it doesn't mean that the ancient people, the older music composers, doesn't know about that. And they like, it is not because they don't know, but actually the old music are composed more like appropriately by some other reasons. So here are the fragments about that. And it is before, yeah, this is about the kind of, I show the excerpt here. So this is a short phrase that talks about in earlier time it is said that those music were used mainly for the religious purpose and there is no theater music, but at the point that comes. And so this comes to the core, like whether, so Pseudo-Plutarch, the author of the treatise, from the dialogue and try to show his own thoughts about those old music, although they use less like musical scales, it doesn't mean that it is more simpler. It has its more function, and it is more appropriate by the careful use of those features for more like religious or more like educational purpose. Okay, so I will have to stop it here because it's half of the time. I need to come to the ancient Chinese way. So the main source about the ancient Chinese tradition is what they call the records of music, 乐记, in the Book of Rites. So that's a pre-Han Dynasty Confucius treatise, and we believe that it is compiled before Han Dynasty, so it is 2nd century BC, but it is probably, like the original material is probably compiled from the Warring State period. So I've listed here. There is a story that talks about Zixia, a pupil of Confucius, and he was very old at that time when he taught to the Marquis Wen of Wei. So it may happen in around like during Marquis' reign, so like 430, 420 BC at that time. And so they have a discussion in length about the old music and new music, and the new music in the discussion is called the music of Zheng and Wei. Like Zheng and Wei are the two states in the Warring State China. So that's the Chinese, but I just quickly go through the translation. So Marcus Wen just have the question about when he dressed very formally and listened to the ancient music, he feel like he's more tired. He feel he was bored and tired, but when he listened to the tone of Zheng and Wei, and he doesn't feel tired. So can I ask, why is the ancient music like that? And also, what is the new music? So that from that we know that the context about new music means the music of Zheng and Wei. So Zixia replies very in length. So in ancient music, those are like what is the good features of it. It is spring with the upright harmony, and it is the superior man, Junzi, should kind of more enjoying the ancient music because it has the meaning and it kind of echoes with the harmony of the heaven. So those are the kind of good beauty of the ancient music and also the meaning. So that's in length. But then Zixia criticized the new music because he mentioned that the dancers, the music are kind of too complicated, too lascivious. Like it's it just have like from a later commentary that we have from Mozart's stories, like too many notes for new music, and so for that music it was considered not balancing. I will explain that later. So it is compared to the ancient music because of those features that new music is considered as a kind of bad example, it leads to bad moral behaviors because of that. And also there is a Chinese context about the difference of the several concepts, yin, yue, and sheng. So sheng means sound, and yin is more like musical tones. The yue is what they consider the real like elegant music in a higher context. So Zixia distinguished that and saying that what Marcus enjoying is only the tone, is only the musical tunes, but it is not the music, it is not the yue, the kind of higher level of the what we need for the higher the echoing the harmony of heaven. Yeah, so Zixia just continue describing a little bit about the music theory and also about how in ancient times why the heaven and earth was more like in harmony and how everything works well, and that's how those ancient sages made the musical temperament to fit it. So, and Zixia quote the book of poetry, quote the Shi Jing, and with his own commentary of it. So, and it mentioned about the several, and then Zixia also explained about the indulgent tones, and so he mentioned about 4 states. So you may remember that the tone of Zheng and Wei are what they call about the new music, and then Zixia mentioned about the 4 states. The tone of Zheng, Song, Wei, and Qi. There are 4 states, and both all considered with a bad taste of music. So, and what the real music should be is like in solemnity, as another part of Shi Jing mentioned. So yeah, those are just too long, and I will just quickly skip it. And so for those discourse, we know about a kind of similar and comparable point of view about the new music from the Confucius point of view. We also have some other writings from Taoist traditions and for example, from the Master Lu's Spring and Autumn Annals or Lü Shi Chun Qiu. It talks about what is the extravagant music. So those are the bad music, and like it is so the Jie of the Xia and Zhou Yin of Zhou of Yin, so they are both 2 famous ancient tyrants. So those are the bad examples about why they are so bad, because they are playing bad music. So they use gigantic drums, bells, and everything was just too much of it, and it is not it regarded something as large as beautiful, but this is not true, because this is a way that and then it also mentioned about how those country gets kind of declined, like the country of Song, it's made 2 large bells, and the country of Cheese, and he has the Song has too many bells, and Qi gets declined because he has such a large musical instrument, and Chu was making a shamanist tone. They are all considered those are kind of bad behavior, and that leads to the country's misfortune. And then also at the next chapter about the suitable sound, and it related music, the correct music, with measurements. Like there is something that it shouldn't be going over too much, and it shouldn't be going too less, and this kind of regulates the good music in that sense. So when we compare to Li Ji, when we come back to, okay, there is another one that talks about what sort of music, the orderly tone should be good, and music is kind of tightly related to the politics. So there are some tones is on a chaotic age because of this features, and some of the tones of the doomsday, like that state is going very bad, and this is how the music is about. When we go back to the records of music, when we go back to the first treatise, and we can find in an earlier chapters that it also mentioned about the way of sounds and music connects with administration. And here is like from the traditional Chinese 5 tones, it mentions those 5 tones represents 5 different objects. And so we need to regulate those 5 tones to keep a good balance of the politics. And then it mentions that, so the music and of Zheng and Wei, the new music, is the music of chaotic age. And so it borders on dissoluteness. So, and then it also mentioned another even worse example. So if Zheng and Wei was on already, this is not a good era considered by the ancient sages. And then if it comes even worse, those music from the mulberries kind of forest between them, and also at the Pool River is the music of the lost state, and those are something that we must kind of forbidden and like, you know, strongly avoided. Now it is. Yes. So the quick conclusion, because we are short of time. So both new music is focusing on entertaining purposes. So the Greek tradition, it has more like focus on virtuosity and that sort of thing. And also from the Chinese traditions that we find comparable, and they kind of address it differently. The Greek consider it as a more theatrical music, and the Chinese consider kind of regional differences, and usually features new music as music of Zheng and Wei. And we actually have some sources that like those music in Zheng and Wei can be more lengthy and can be more talking about the love or romantic themes that is probably not liked by the ancient sages. And they are both on the time that there is a large political change. So from the Greek tradition, there is more theater, like, and then the kind of citizen class has more sponsored the music rather than the aristocratic support before. And from the warring state, it was also considered by the sages that this is on the time that the rights and ritual music was collapsed in that era. So therefore, there is such a new music that comes like destroying the order. And then such tradition was in both cultures were disdained by philosophers and educators, and as they associate with the appropriateness of music. And in the Chinese tradition, it is even stronger, because the Chinese would consider the music is tightly related to the moral behavior of the good people, and also the harmony of the universe, and also on the human society. A very quick one, but this is just another point when we are in the musicological society. Quick thought about that is the idea of Timotheus' poet poetry about how the rebellious feature maybe kind of compare as the kind of political and cultural context compared to the modern like creation of jazz and rock and roll music, and you could find some sort of comparabilities of this. So because of our very limited way, because of our very limited source, such comparison may be kind of possible, and I just keep this thought here. There are just references, but yeah, I think, yeah, this, I'll just keep the page here, and I think I'll end my conclusion here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is for all of us, or maybe most of us, a new topic, a new thinking, as we do not know that much about China, and antiquity is also not the most widely learned part of the history. As we are running out of time, I would suggest that everybody has questions for you in a break now, and I pass the microphone to Leon.
Okay, thank you again.